Thanks for checking out this movie review video. So this is for the 1972 giallo film The Dead Are Alive, and that title makes it sound like it's a zombie film, but it certainly is not. Also, on the topic of titles, this has a lot of different titles to it, and I'll get to that in a minute. This film was directed by Armando Crispino, who did such titles as Pleasant Nights, John the Bastard, Commandos, Autopsy, which is another giallo film that I plan to watch at some point, and get this title, Frankenstein Italian Style. Very interesting. Written by Crispino as well as Lucio Battistrada, who wrote scripts for The Boxer, Crime Boss, also Autopsy, Vatican Conspiracy, and The House of the Yellow Carpet, which sounds like it might be giallo. I'll have to check into that one further. And also involved in writing it, the script, Lutz Eisholz, who wrote a script for a documentary called Bruno the Black, One Day a Hunter Blew His Horn. Just go figure. The score in this film is good. It's over the top, like it is with a lot of films from this era, especially giallo films, and it beats you over the head in a crazy manner, but the score is good. It is done by Riz Ortolani, and if people are like, oh, that name sounds familiar, best known for the score that he did for Cannibal Holocaust, but also did scores for So Sweet, So Perverse, which I have a review for on my channel, Seven Bloodstained Orchids, also have a review for on my channel, Seven Deaths in the Cat's Eye, also have a review for on my channel, and The Pajama Girl Case, which I also have a review for on my channel and hate. That's a terrible film, but the score, quite good, because Ortolani does an amazing job. This film is known as, ready for this? Mystery of the Yellow Grave. Makes sense. Overtime. Don't understand that one. The Death God Kills Again, makes sense, and the Etruscan Kills Again, because obviously we are very focused on this ancient Etruscan tomb that has been excavated by Porter. They call him Jason and they call him Porter sometimes in the film, so I'm just going to call him Porter. So he's found this, and the killer, in the end, has seen the ancient drawings in the tomb and decided to take inspiration. It's kind of triggered him and took inspiration for killing young couples. And that's the whole crux of the giallo here. The music does come at you very hard in the beginning, like I was talking about, how a lot of these types of films tend to have this really hard score that's like it's screaming at you. So I'm really glad that we are where we are now with film, where it's more restrained. It's kind of giving the audience more breathing room as far as that stuff goes, not leading them by the hand in an auditory sense nearly as much. But I understand, like, this is what they were doing in film at this time, so I understand that. But I'm still going to call it out. Thank goodness characters are actually doing something during the opening credits. Now, this is something that a lot of these types of films, giallos and giallo-inspired films, they'll have opening credits and it's like a freeze frame of something, and then the credits are going. Totally boring. It's usually something very stupid and innocuous. So the fact that they're actually having part of the backstory going on while they're showing the opening credits, that's a plus for me on this one. It's not an insane plus, but that's a plus because I've seen enough of these films and I don't need a freeze frame for opening credits. Horny kids always sneaking off and getting killed, which is what happens very early on in this film. In this instance, it looks like they were bludgeoned with the rod that Porter was messing with around the opening credits. It was messing around with in the opening credits. And he called that a probe. So, yeah, that was basically like what he was using to go down through the soil and be able to see into the tomb, I guess is what it looked like. It's like a reverse periscope, in a sense. So anyway, yes, that is what it looked like it was, and that it is what it was. That was the first murder weapon, which obviously starts people to think, oh, did Porter do it? Because he was the last person seen with this device. Now, they throw a lot into this film that points heavily at Porter, which is why, if you've watched enough giallo films, you know, early on, it's definitely not Porter. Because the people they point at the hardest in these films are pretty much never the people who did it. Every now and then they'll actually do that, but for the most part, no. They certainly paint Nikos as an unhinged old man, and he is yet another one of their red herrings. Nikos, the old man who is the father of, I guess it was Myra and Irene, I think was his other daughter. Yeah, so, and I guess, was Stephen his son? Son or son-in-law? I couldn't figure that one out, but he definitely is painted as very unhinged. Like, he's this kind of eccentric composer slash orchestra conductor guy. And he's an interesting character. I do like his character, and he's an interesting red herring as well. There are a few moments where you feel like, yeah, maybe it could be this guy. But once again, they do kind of point at him so hard that you're just kind of like, it can't be really. Porter has an odd sense of romance. He asks Myra if making love in an ancient tomb turns her on. I don't know many people who would be into that. I actually know some people maybe who might be into that, but the overwhelming majority of people, not so much. I'm assuming Myra also was not that way by the way she was kind of resisting him. Now, I don't know if this was the drunken Porter talking or the sober Porter talking, but it's hard to tell in this film because he's drinking a decent amount and they talk a decent amount about his alcohol issues. And it's actually used so much to kind of point at him as potentially being the killer because they're like, look, he drinks so hard, he's not a good person already, or he drinks so hard that he's in fact blacking out and he can't even necessarily remember what he's done. And they point to that with the whole reveal that I'll talk about a little bit more later with what happened between he and Myra that he actually doesn't remember that was a huge event in their life. A murderer with a penchant for ancient Etruscan art. A mystery indeed. They kind of point that out. In the end, obviously, it ends up having nothing to do with the art itself. But in the beginning, they try to make you feel that way. And for that reason, it also kind of helps them point you at another red herring, which was Otello, the guy who was kind of like dressed like a bellhop or like a chauffeur, basically, who was in the beginning, who almost saw that horny couple who was sneaking around. And he eventually obviously gets killed. But he was another one of those red herrings that they were able to successfully kind of set up with talking about, the art aspect, this ancient Etruscan art aspect of the killer. And another young couple ends up getting off. Yes, I think 3 couples total. Well, 2.5 because of Igor. And, as we know, not a spoiler because, if you're watching this, this is all spoilers. So Igor, the killer, lives, which I'll talk a bit more about that in a bit. Wow, Porter's drunken rant about Myra getting with Igor, and basically anyone who moves is something. It does cast suspicion on him as being unhinged, as being erratic, as not being able to be trusted necessarily, because with his heavy drinking, he starts to kind of like lash out, say crazy things, act unhinged, and then we find out also later that he was hospitalized, or, well, I guess he was. Like, they showed the attempt to hospitalize him, but I assume he actually was because of the drinking basically leading him to having like a mental breakdown in a sense. But yeah, his whole rant about her sleeping around, probably getting with Igor, probably getting with every man who's ever been, basically, like, that's a crazy, and it seems like it's out of nowhere too. It's something. The inspector being so interested in Porter lets you know he's not the guy. One of many reasons, like I was talking about. Steven seems way too volatile to be the killer, especially on his interaction with Porter in the kitchen. Yeah, that's another red herring that they just went way too hard at. Steven, like, looks like a villain, acts like a villain, especially when he's like randomly eating things and just like looking evil, talking evil to people. Like, he's got this like flippant attitude that has like a sinister twist to it, and they just go so hard at trying to make him like a stereotypical villain that you're just like, nah, there's no way. But I like the scene between Porter and Steven in the kitchen early on. That was pretty funny. The Etruscan art seems like a bit of a red herring when Porter is attacked at night and the perpetrator burns the demon face drawing, the demon face art. So at that point, I kind of felt like this probably has nothing to do with the actual art, because I don't think if the killer was actually into this art and after this art that they would have burned that. Now, I believe that was a picture of the art, but I think that they wouldn't burn something like that. Could be wrong, but that's kind of the thought, my train of thought at that point. There's a lot of focus on Porter's drinking, and it starts to be spun as a way to call his memory and composure into question. I already kind of talked about this, his kind of like erratic nature, but also, and this is the weirdest thing, that like they're literally saying like he's an alcoholic, he's got a drinking problem, therefore he could be a murderer. I mean, it's kind of crazy. You know, maybe people kind of thought this back then, but it seems wild watching it now. I'll say that. Igor's pornographic picture is pretty funny. When they go to see Igor, who had been attacked, and he's recuperating in the hospital, he has this drawing of like the nurses having sex with him, basically. And I just thought that was funny that they actually show you that drawing, because it is like actual pornographic drawing. And also, like, all the jokes he makes about it, like, oh, these women are all over me, like they're always trying to get a piece, basically. It's just kind of weird, but funny. And you know, with these giallo films, you have this kind of like weird quirkiness all the time. I chuckled at the flashback of Porter's breakdown when he was being taken to the hospital. Like, the acting during that scene is just laughably funny, in my opinion. So, had a good chuckle. I had a good chuckle on that one. Like, it's so over the top, but it's a good time. And they go even harder at Porter as a suspect when they reveal that he tried to kill Myra. This is the thing I was referring to earlier, that he got so drunk that he couldn't remember what happened. How do you not remember, at least to some degree, stabbing someone? It really connects with him that he actually did forget this thing when he sees a scar on her chest. Now, a few questions based off this. Why is Myra still with him if that's what happened? And two, I think I just lost two already. Oh, but anyway, they basically use that whole moment to increase the probability of Porter being the killer even further. They're like, yes, we've talked about his alcoholism. We've talked about him basically being committed. We've talked about the fact that he'll black out and do terrible things. Now we've shown that he may have, he almost killed someone, even someone close to him. So they keep upping the ante on him, which once again is the reason that I was like, there's no way it's him. Does Steven think Porter will kill him over the photographer? Because the chase is pretty excessive for something like that. Good chase scene, I will say, when Porter goes to confront Steven because he sent some photographer to take pictures of him and Myra, which I didn't even really understand that whole thing. So he goes and he shows him the camera that he's taken from the I guess, journalist, photographer, I don't know. And immediately Steven starts running, and it's just this long chase scene that's in cars, and then it's on foot, and he finally catches up with him, and then he's just like, okay, I'll talk to you, basically. Did he really think that he was going to, like, kill him over the photographer? It's just kind of weird. But fun enough chase scene. So Lenny wants Porter to take Myra away so she can try to get back together with Nikos. Then, obviously, much later, we kind of get we do get the backstory on what happened between Lenny and Nikos, and also why she had a burned scalp, which was an interesting reveal, because when she reveals it, I believe Porter, like, drops his glass and it shatters that he was drinking from, and he was, like, he was just super shocked, which, I mean, it is a kind of a shocking moment to see it, because you're not expecting it, but, yeah, so, basically, she just wants them gone, because she's just like, look, I need as much space as possible. I need to be with Nikos. It's obvious that she hasn't gotten over him, which is weird because she had been cheating on him. I don't know. Very weird. I guess she made a mistake. Interesting twist with the murders mirroring the drawings in the Etruscan tomb. I already talked about that in the beginning, but I do think that was an interesting element to throw in for the story. It ends up not really having that much of any significance, but it's interesting nonetheless. And you don't know it at the time when it's revealed. Porter choking Nikos during their confrontation is not going to convince anyone of his innocence. Once again, another one of these things that happens with Porter, that they're just going so hard at him. And for his character in particular, like, this makes no sense, because if you're trying to convince people that you have nothing to do with these murders, standing there choking someone is not going to convince anyone, especially the person you're choking, that you did not do this. But then again, I think maybe at that point, Porter may be thinking that Nikos was the killer. So maybe he was thinking, I can potentially just kill this guy and it'll all be over. But he's wrong. My first thought when Porter confronts Nikos with the tape recorder is that he faked having a heart attack, but actually we find out he was actually going through some sort of medical distress, and then it ends up killing him later. So, yeah, that happened. And obviously, the whole tape recorder situation ends up happening, and the music was played during the kills because Igor had access to the recorder because of having access to Nico's, obviously. Yeah, I figured it was Igor since all the victims except him died. I did think this at the time. I thought it was very suspicious that the first couple, both of them were killed. Then Igor lived, and what was the woman he was with at that point? Giselle, that she died, and then there was the couple after them, and both people died. And I was just like, I don't think this killer is very sloppy, so they really cast suspicion on Igor for me. I'm like, I'm betting it's Igor because he just made it look like he was also attacked and he was actually the killer. Thank goodness we finally get a flashback to what happened to Lenny's scalp. Space heaters are dangerous, people. Just so you know, that is totally true. Space heaters can be very dangerous. Although, the space heaters you can buy now significantly safer than the ones back then, especially from what you can see. It was literally just like this open heating element that people could just run into and burn their skin off. Crazy. And that scene is nuts, too. Like, how she gets, like, thrown. It's even more nuts, too, because you're seeing Igor watching his mom get it on with some guy. And he seems to be happy about it. Very weird. So Igor's killing is because of his childhood trauma of seeing Nikos confront his mother for cheating. The violence wrapped up with the pleasure at that point for him is what creates this trigger that happens much later in life. And this has been done in giallo films a lot, where that's the motivation for the killer. It's not necessarily a conscious choice. It's kind of like this subconscious trauma that comes to the forefront and almost takes their body over, basically, takes their conscience over, and makes them start killing because of this trauma. It's just this flipped switch that ends up happening. And obviously that's, seeing people have sex for Igor is what makes this happen, because he believes that they're basically unclean. He even says that about Giselle, who was his girlfriend, I believe, at that point, and had sex with him, because then he makes a comment about, she was dirty. But then after that, Porter points out that, he killed her, and then he realized what he had done. So it's kind of like it was like a split personality for him, and the trauma part of him took over and killed her, and then the non-trauma part of him realized what had happened after he kind of come down off the high of the killing, and he was like, oh my gosh. And Porter suggests that he then tried to off himself, but I don't know if that was the case or not. I could see it either way, that maybe he did actually try and kill himself and he didn't succeed. He said he tried to jump from the upper balcony in the barn or something. But yeah, I don't know. Either way. Seems like Igor has a split personality, since Porter says he felt bad about killing Giselle right after, and when he sees his reflection, he then kills himself, as he then realizes what he's done. Which I guess, thinking about it further, that would indicate that maybe he did try and kill himself in the barn. He just was unsuccessful, and then he kind of decided, forget it, because maybe people won't figure out it was me. So then, yeah. It's an interesting moment at the end where he kind of sees the mirror that's all broken, and he's seeing, numerous reflections of himself. And you see him, see himself in there, and it's kind of like he sees into his own soul, and he realizes what he's done and how he's a terrible person, and then he decides to, stab himself with that shard of the mirror. So pretty decent moment in the film. There's a good deal of people slowly walking around in this film. Yes, the runtime would have been great to have it cut down, because it's like an hour and 45 minutes, which is a lot for a film like this. But, films were like this back then. I understand that. Kind of like the score thing. Films were like this. I get it. Creepy enough settings in this. I did like the settings they happened to pick and the set designs that they used. That was fun. And they use a good amount of blood, but the kills are weak. The kills really suck. I mean, it's more of those suggested kills. You don't actually see people getting killed for the most part. It's usually off screen, but then they show you a lot of blood, either off screen, blood coming onto the screen, or the aftermath and there being a lot of blood. So, I mean, kind of points for having a lot of blood, but not points because your kills were terrible and off screen. So I don't know. So out of 5 stars with half stars in play, man, I'm going to give it 2.5 stars, because I do feel pretty conflicted on this one. I was between 2 and 2.5, but I'm going to do 2.5, because there is some decent stuff in this film. Some, you know, they made a good effort, in my opinion. But I would like to hear how you feel about this film, so go ahead and put it in the comments. Love it, hate it, in between. Let's talk about it. And just giallo in general, if you want to, or horror in general, we can talk about that too. Do me a quick favor, though. If you have not subscribed to my channel yet, please do me that favor and do it. It is literally the best way to repay me. If you like this video or any video I've ever done, it literally keeps me motivated to keep doing these. Because when I'm doing this review right now, I'm not getting paid to do this or anything. So motivation is key. Also, hit the notification bell button because then you'll know when I'm putting up new videos, which I'm doing 4 a week at this point, sometimes a little bit more. Usually not less, unless Shudder's not putting out a new film in a week, but they usually are. So, but anyway, regardless, I appreciate you taking your time to watch this video, and until next time, keep it brutal.